Chapter 7 of Tractate Yevamos further goes through additional laws of the levirate marriage. The Mishnah says, if a widow is married to a Kohen Gadol, which is impermissible, or a divorcee, or a woman who did chalitza, is married to a Kohen, the woman's property, which has the designation of either son barzel, an item of assessed value, which is declared to the status, and is returned to the woman in the event of the marriage's termination, or the designation of milog, which is basically everything else, and if the marriage terminates, she gets the value of the item as is, meaning not accounting for its original amount. Anyways, if she had slaves, if they were designated as milog, they cannot eat terumah, and if they die or go up in value, it's her loss or gain. If they're designated as son barzel, they can eat terumah, and if they die or go up in value, the value goes to the husband. If the daughter of a Yisrael marries a Kohen and has slaves of either sort, they can eat terumah. If the daughter of a Kohen marries a non-Kohen and had slaves of either sort, they cannot eat terumah. The Gemara debates this point from a source which implies that the slave of the wife of a Kohen can also eat terumah, regardless of the status of the wife, but this is different here as it's a widow who can't eat terumah herself, so therefore can't allow others to, which is a bit of a general rule. Others disagree and say that actually they can eat terumah. The point is that they want to cause issues, so the widow divorces him, therefore, as it's a forbidden marriage. Others say it's forbidden out of concern that she'll continue giving them terumah after the husband had died, and this applies by all widows married to a Kohen Gadol. It further defines the different property statuses of milog and son barzel, which are further discussed, and there are some additional points on this. New Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, if a Yisrael's daughter marries a Kohen and the Kohen dies, leaving her pregnant, her son barzel slaves can't eat terumah due to the fetus in the womb, which disqualifies them from eating the terumah. The rabbis say by that logic that would also apply to a Kohen's daughter too. The Gemara asks why exactly the fetus disqualifies them from eating terumah, possibly as it's a non-Kohen while it's a fetus, so there's no Kohen to make the terumah permissible. Possibly because an unborn Kohen can't entitle others to eat terumah. There's a practical difference if the fetus is a girl. There's debate as to which one is the issue. Some say if there are other children besides for the fetus, slaves can eat terumah in their account, or possibly from the father's brothers, or even his other relatives. This topic is further discussed. Some say a daughter entitles others to eat terumah along with a son, unlike by just a son in a case where it's a meager estate, which is qualified. New Mishnah, a fetus, somebody requiring yibum, somebody going through betrothal, a deaf-mute, and a boy 9 years and a day old disqualify others from eating terumah, but cannot entitle others to eat terumah on their account. This would also apply if there's a doubt if the boy is 9 years and a day old, or if there's a doubt if the betrothed boy has fully reached the necessary stage of physical development. If a house fell on him and his brother's daughter, and you don't know which died first, her co-wife does chalitza and cannot do yibum. The Gemara qualifies points on these laws. The explanation is provided for these instances, and specifics on these situations are discussed. It also speaks on sources for these points from scripture. There's further discussion on other prohibited unions which prohibit a woman, and disputes on second-generation Egyptians or Edomites and similar. New Mishnah, someone who violates or seduces a woman or is deranged, they do not disqualify the woman they cohabited with from eating terumah, and they do not get to eat terumah themselves. If they are unfit to marry a Jewish person, they would disqualify her. It gives specific instances of several of these cases. The Gemara further discusses these points, and it brings verses as sources, and it goes through some of the specific case instances and qualifies them. And that's the end of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Tractate Yevamos covers additional laws on the levirate marriage, and also on the permissibility of people connected to Kohanim eating terumah, which is produce tithes that are given to Kohanim. The Mishnah says an uncircumcised person and someone ritually impure cannot eat terumah, but their wives and slaves can. If a Kohen had injured genitals, his slaves can eat terumah, but his wife cannot. If he had not cohabited with his wife after his genitals had gotten injured, his wife can eat terumah. It gives definition as to what exactly constitutes a genital injury. The Gemara cites the scriptural source for these rulings, which are discussed as to how this is derived from their words. It also is learned from a comparison to a verse about the Paschal offering, which is further qualified in regards to how we know an uncircumcised individual cannot eat terumah. There are further verses on this topic discussed. It also speaks on specific cases of a lack of circumcision disqualifying individuals from the Paschal offering, and also some say that they can still be purified from ritual impurity. There are other particular verses mentioned on specifics with the practice of circumcision. Some say the Jewish people born in the desert were not circumcised until they crossed the Jordan River and entered Israel, as they were tired from the journey, or because the north wind didn't blow for them, possibly as God was rebuking them, possibly so the clouds of glory wouldn't disperse. Based on this, some say not to circumcise or draw blood on a cloudy or extremely windy day, but it says now that everybody does it, so God will protect them. There are issues cited with someone who is circumcised, but his skin is in a way that he looks uncircumcised, with such an individual eating Terumah. Some say he can't, others dispute this, and sources are cited. This is further discussed, and it also debates if an uncircumcised person is allowed to perform the water sprinkling for ritual impurity on somebody else. It's disputed. This is discussed. It's debated if an uncircumcised person can eat Ma'aser Sheni tithes based on how it's compared to the Paschal offering. There's also a dispute if a mourner is permitted to eat Ma'aser Sheni tithes or Bikurim, the first fruit tithes, and the opinions that say you can or can't cite verses which imply like their opinions, and this whole thing is further discussed. This whole topic in regards to a lack of circumcision or a lack of proper circumcision as to who can eat Ma'aser Sheni tithes is further qualified with several proofs from a bunch of different sources, but it also brings the verse sources that an impure person cannot eat Terumah. These verses are further discussed. This is all explained further, and it also argues over who the source is for the point against a Kohen with injured genitals from his wife eating Terumah, and it further qualifies what exactly constitutes an injured genital. There are several possible different forms of injuries listed in detail, be they punctures or cuts, and how severe the wounds need to be, etc. There are a few other particularities that constitute a genital injury. It also says we don't hold like the opinion that if somebody urinates from two places, he's unfit to marry, and it also says if a person and a woman cohabit without intent to marry, this constitutes the woman as a zona. But if the woman had relations with another woman, this does not legally constitute as cohabitation, so they're not rendered a zona, but it says it's still generally improper. New Mishnah, somebody with injured genitals can still marry a convert or a freed slave woman, but they can't marry a regular Jewish woman. This is based on the verse, one with wounded or crushed testicles or whose member is severed may not enter the congregation of God. The Gemara debates by this if a Kohen is allowed to marry these women, as he normally cannot, but perhaps now he can due to his unique injured state. We bring a proof that he would be allowed to, as his state of sanctity is removed after this injury. It also debates if the prohibition against intermarriage applies by a legally binding marriage, which is debated based on some verses on King Shlomo with the Pharaoh's daughter who he married. There's further discussion by these points. New Mishnah, an Ammonite or a Moabite convert and their descendants are not permitted to marry Jewish people. Female Ammonite and Moabite converts can. An Egyptian and Edomite convert can't marry in for 3 generations, both for male and female. Rabbi Shimon allows the marriage immediately, which is based on a comparison to the others, which some doubt, but he says it's also just a law passed down from tradition. The Gemara cites verses as a source for these rulings, and it discusses some related verses about David and King Shaul. There are several other verses on this discussed and expounded on about King David, and further points in the source for the prohibition of the daughter of Ammonite converts from marrying a Kohen, which is compared to a Kohen Gadol cohabiting with a widow, along with other related points, and these topics are all discussed further. There are also related verses brought, and some other rulings, like if a second-generation Egyptian convert married a first-generation female Egyptian convert, their son is classified as a third-generation Egyptian convert, which implies we go according to the father, but other sources imply we go like the mother, but that source is an exception, as it's where the mother was a slave woman, which had unique laws. This is further debated, and there are sources that say it does actually go in accordance with the mother. There are other opinions on this discussed. Some say if they've converted, you follow the more blemished of the two, meaning if a male Ammonite convert married a female Egyptian convert, if the child is male, he goes after his Ammonite father. If it's a female, she goes after her Egyptian mother. New Mishnah. A mamzer, a child born from a forbidden cohabitation, and the Chivite inhabitants of Gibeon that tricked Yeshua into being converted during the conquering of Israel as described in the books of prophets, are forever not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, both men and women. The Gemara says a dissenting opinion that a female mamzer is allowed to marry into the Jewish people after 10 generations, and it brings a source. Some say this is not even an issue, as mamzerim are said to not have their line continue for any generations if they're not publicly known about. If only some know about their status, it's said that their line will continue for 3 generations. There's an incident mentioned where a sage publicly declared a man as a mamzer so that way God would allow him to live. The verses regarding the Gibeonites are all discussed, and there are several other verses related. It also says, eventually the sages decided to release those people from the servitude they had sworn to from the times of Yahushua, which they did, and also the altar in the temple had no ownership over them, as this was after the destruction of the temple. New Mishnah, a saris, a sterile man, either from castration or a disorder, is said to be allowed to do chalitza and have chalitza performed after his death, but then they also say that they can't, which is seemingly contradictory, so there are some explanations. Some say this means that a saris adam, a sterile male from castration, is allowed to do chalitza, as there was a period where he was viable. A saris chama, a sterile male from birth, from a disorder, would not be allowed to do chalitza because he was never viable. Others say it's the exact opposite. A saris chama can do chalitza, as he has the possibility of a cure, unlike by a saris adam, as he's castrated. There's an incident which implies like the first opinion. Anyways, a saris, or an ilonis, a woman who does not physically mature in a typical manner, do not do chalitza or yibum. If a saris did do chalitza or yibum, he hasn't really done anything, so the woman can still marry a Kohen. If he cohabited with her, she cannot marry a Kohen, as this is an illicit relation. Or if brothers did chalitza or yibum with an ilonis, it doesn't do anything, and she's not disqualified for marrying a Kohen, unless they cohabited with her, in which case that's illicit relations. The Gemara says that actually the first opinion would allow the saris adam to do chalitza and yibum, based on his other logics of the case, and we bring sources. It also gives definition as to these saris deformities, and say that they can be caused by the mother drinking beer while he's a fetus, and other points. These particularities are further discussed. It also further qualifies as to what exactly constitutes these unique disorders, and this is all further discussed. New Mishnah. A saris chama, a sterile male who was born that way, who is a Kohen, who was married to the daughter of a Yisrael, she can still eat terumah. Some say a tumtum, a person with a genital condition that causes him to be of indeterminate gender due to excess flesh covering the region, his wife can eat terumah. Some say if the flesh is torn and he's found to be a male, he should not do chalitza because he is now considered a saris. An androgynous, somebody with both male and female genitals, can marry a woman, but not a man. Some say that if a man cohabits with an androgynous, the same punishment applies as a man cohabiting with another man. The Gemara explains that it needed to say a saris chama Kohen's wife is allowed to eat terumah, even though he cannot have children. It says an androgynous Kohen's wife can eat terumah, but some say she can't eat the breast and thigh of a kachei kalim offering, which are offerings of greater holiness. Others disagree and say she could. It's disputed, and this is all further discussed. It's spoken on a bit further and debated as to who exactly we hold like. It also disputes as to what exactly an androgynous constitutes. Some say they're considered a male, some disagree. It's debated if their marriage is a fully legally acceptable one. This is discussed along with some related points. It also goes through some points on grafting, what the gender of a tumtum whose flesh covering is torn open is considered, which is debated, and particularities as to the prohibition against a man cohabiting with an androgynous, where it brings verses as source. It also says the opinion that holds that a man cohabiting with an androgynous is the same as a male cohabiting with another male does not necessarily hold that an androgynous is always considered to be legally a male, which is relevant by several other laws. It also mentions an incident where they taught the teaching that a male can't cohabit with an androgynous. And that's the end of chapter 8.